Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Is this there? Good. So my goals with this presentation this morning are to make you in general a bit more familiar with the work that we do at, I should be over here, for the camera, thank you. To make you more familiar with the work that we do in the California Language Archive, relative to some of the other archives represented in this room. We have found that we are sometimes less well known. This is not a technical talk like some of the earliest talks in this session, and it is more anecdotal around the collection development work that we do. And I would frame it relative to Mandana's talk as addressing in part the uptake problem in getting people to get things into language archives. It's a 4-year progress report because I have had the job that I have had for 4 years. So we are a physical and digital archive for papers, recordings, and photographs related to the indigenous languages of the Americas. We are officially embedded in the linguistics department at UC Berkeley, and were created together with the department in 1953. We were for many, many decades a very traditional paper archive, and starting in the early 2010s developed a digital interface that came to be known as the California Language Archive. The structure of the archive includes a faculty director that has existed since the 1950s, not in the same person, a manager position which has only existed for 4 years, and that is in fact the first full-time position that ever existed in the archive. IT support, which comes from the linguistics department, and student assistance. Are we okay? Originally, the archive was more or less staffed exclusively by graduate students that worked half-time as part of their compensation for the PhD. As of this month, we hold 440 accessioned collections, representing over 500 language varieties. We do not have corpora, we have collections, and collections can be extremely wide-ranging in size. A collection might be 1 notebook with 1 tape, or it might be 5 filing cabinets that represent most of the work of a linguist over their career. That corresponds to almost 20,000 items in our catalog and over 53,000 digital files. And in addition, we have over 70 collections still in progress in one way or another. Currently, and most recently, we have received our primary funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities and Arcadia. If you go to cla.berkeley.edu, this is what you will first see. It occurs to me I should have put an image of our map search on here so you could have a sense of the geographical scope, but you can do that on your own time. In terms of our overall activities, we are involved in the preservation of materials from current and past language projects. We work a lot in getting community members access to materials, especially in the context of California. The core set of archival collections were originally all of California languages, and so we are well known among California indigenous groups, for example. We do a lot of outreach to students and researchers who may be in possession of legacy materials, and we do this also sometimes in coordination with indigenous communities themselves. Sometimes we are contacted by tribal groups in California, for example, saying, we cannot get a hold of X person who we know came here 50 years ago. Can you help us out? We have an active digitization project of papers, audiovisual recordings, and photographs. And we also sponsor something called the Breath of Life Archival Institute for California Indigenous Languages, which takes place every 2 years and brings about 50 California Indian people to the Berkeley campus so that they can consult cultural heritage materials, not only in our archive, but also in the Special Collections Library, which is one of the largest special collections libraries in the country, and in the Museum of Anthropology on campus. And we also have 2 publication series that we maintain. This is one of our 3 physical spaces, our research room. This is part of one of our storage rooms. Now I basically just want to walk you through some examples of each of those activities, especially the bit about legacy collections, which is going to be the majority of this. So in the last 4 years, we have accessioned 107, we have created 107 collections, 62 of which have been accessioned. And in addition, there are many collections that were created before that time that have been accessioned in that window, and collections that have been increasingly developed in that time, including by some people in this room. And we work with Berkeley graduate students and faculty members on these projects. We work with external depositors, and a lot of it is work that we do just with archive staff regarding legacy materials that may or may not come from intermediaries. And we also work extensively with the undergraduate and graduate field methods courses, which I would not call a language documentation course. Mandan and I have discussed this. And I'll give some examples of that. And tape digitization, actually, we do not do in-house, which takes up most of our operating budget. And we use both a studio on campus and a different studio near San Francisco to have that done. At Berkeley, we are fortunate to have an endowment that funds fieldwork by linguistics graduate students and staff members. This comes with an archiving requirement, which generates a lot of the current input into the CLA. And so I'm just going to give some examples here. Becky Jarvis, who is in this room, is one of our graduate students and has been involved with both other graduate students and collaborators in Cote d'Ivoire in creating a collection primarily of sound recordings of elicitation sessions on Zoom and in person. We have a lot of collections by graduate students that began during the pandemic, and archiving Zoom recordings was something we had to do from very early on. We also have many collections from graduate students that come from a more traditional individual project that has been done entirely in person. So the Yanisha Field Materials collection comes from Allegra Robertson from work done in Peru. And this is a smaller collection, but a greater mixture of recordings of elicitation and texts and transcriptions. We also work with faculty members. Larry Hyman, for example, a phonologist, has had an ongoing project done entirely on Zoom, studying the tone of Tiania, which is a dialect of Kimeru. And he has recorded not just those Zoom recordings, but also draft manuscripts that he is in the process of writing, and he's one of the last people on earth maybe still using FileMaker Pro, and we have those database files as well. Good. So in terms of external depositors, I'll just give one brief example since this is maybe the kind of example that people are most familiar with. We are currently working with a team that includes Pilar Valenzuela and Roberto Sariquie, archiving materials related to Amawaka language from Peru. I included this example in part so I could just also include a screenshot of what our back end looks like, basically. So we do not yet use Lametta, and when the CLA was developed a custom web-based platform for creating metadata that we call the pre-archive. That's a whole other talk, but feel free to ask questions about it. And also I wanted to use this example just to highlight that even though we do not have technically a Spanish or Portuguese language interface, we do allow people to write the free text descriptive metadata in whatever language or languages they choose, which can get a bit clunky, but for the time being is something that we find important enough to allow people to do. So you will see the titles in this list are both in English and in Spanish. So now, with the time that I have left, I want to just give you some examples of the legacy collections that we have developed over the last couple of years. And in part, so I can just tell you things that are not on the slide about how exactly this kind of stuff came into the archive. Our legacy collections vary greatly in size and in age. An early example of work on this comes from a linguist, Susan Steele, who is a retired faculty member from the University of Arizona. She happened to retire to the Bay Area, became a visiting scholar in the linguistics department at UC Berkeley. And after getting to know her well enough, one day I finally asked her, do you have any old tapes and papers from your work in the 1970s? She had long since gone into university administration and was not as active in the field specifically. And it turned out in particular she had over 2,000 pages of notes on Luiseño language, which is a highly, highly endangered Udo-Aztecan language of Southern California, that, not to malign her, but she simply had no plan in place for what to do with them, and they were simply in her house. Luiseno has very little archival material available. This was a huge addition to the corpus available to Luiseno people in Southern California. Another example comes from a Peruvian anthropologist. I should say actually that a lot of the work that we have been doing has been not only with linguists, but also with anthropologists, who probably do better text collection, at least traditionally, than linguists. This led to a nice corpus of over 75 recordings of stories and interviews and songs, and transcriptions that have been digitized but are not yet included in the collection. Sometimes the collections are very small. Anna Lewington was a graduate student at St. Andrews in the early 80s. She did precisely one trip to Peru in 1981 and made 2 cassette tapes. But those cassette tapes are the only known recordings of particular people and also of particular versions of a small number of Matsigenga stories from Peru. Fortunately, she had already had the tapes digitized in London, and so it was a relatively easy collection to put together. This one is about Bernat, who he can tell you about it with more time. Sometimes we discover researchers' work who are not well known in the field. So Susanna Weiss-Shahak is an Israeli ethnomusicologist who had worked in Peru in the 1970s. After her dissertation, she started working on Sephardic musical traditions and completely left behind Americanist work. And we only learned about her because in another collection, there was correspondence with her and an American anthropologist. But she had 10 cassette tapes, 8mm film, and also beautiful photography in Jerusalem that she shipped to us. This man, Alfred Pietroforte, did a master's degree in history in the late 50s, where he wrote a thesis on California Indian songs. He completely left that work behind, but in the early 2000s, that thesis was published as a short book with an accompanying CD. It turned out that behind that CD, there were more recordings on the original tape, and at 97 years old, he took it down to the post office for us and mailed it to us. But again, even though it's just one tape, it's more than was published, and it is unique recordings of many, many individuals. And I will skip these just for the sake of time. And I just want to give this sort of visual example of what a larger legacy collection can look like for us. These are just the paper portion of a collection related to Ashaninka language from Peru that we brought back from Florida in 2021. In haste, the anthropologist in question had passed away. His daughter had to sell his home within 2 weeks, and there were 10 boxes shipped to us and then 10 boxes of cultural objects that were eventually shipped also to Peru. The collections that I was just describing earlier are relatively quick and easy to put together. I'm still very slowly working through the cataloging of this collection. There were also 90 tapes and about 6,000 photographs on slides. And so I'll just mention here as the last main point the work that we do with the field methods courses taught at Berkeley. So graduate field methods has been taught in the department since its inception, and usually via the papers of particular faculty members. We have records of these courses going back to 1954. And since 2014, the students in those courses have used our pre-archive system directly to create archival collections throughout the year that the course takes place. So by the end of the year, it's actually more or less we just have to press a button and the collection becomes visible to the public. Before 2014, there were just accounts on the departmental server that were created for the courses, and files were just dumped there. So there's this period from about 2000 to 2014 where there was a lot of work to be done to sift through digital files sitting on the department server. And then obviously from older previous courses, things are just all on paper and on tape. This has been a huge source of growth for the archive and represents most of the languages that are not from the Americas in our collections, a lot of them come from the field methods courses in the linguistics department. We have so far documented 75 graduate courses taught since 1954, and 38 of those have now associated archival collections. Great. So in closing, I want to just mention some of the access work that we do with indigenous communities. So we both directly ourselves sponsor, financially sponsor visits to the California Language Archive. We also work sometimes with tribal nonprofits in California who fund visitors. Breath of Life brings visitors to the Berkeley campus. And there are many, many more, actually, additional visits of indigenous people in California who come usually because they are meeting with representatives on the Berkeley campus for a different reason. Usually it's related to the repatriation of cultural objects and human remains out of the Anthropology Museum, and they also want to discuss language when they come to Berkeley, in which case they come to us usually. In this context, we give people in-person and virtual access to the materials, and I'll just close by noting that the digital access we give is both easy and difficult to track. So for our non-public records where we actually have to grant access, that's easy to track. We have given 593 separate access requests over the last 4 years, and we can roughly track downloads of individual files and folders, and there have been 4,700 downloads of files and folders in the last 4 years. So there's a lot of use in the background that we are not always paying attention to, but most of our holdings are publicly accessible. Great, thank you.